Hey everybody, I'm Jason and this is Jay's Project Garage. Did you miss me? I didn't make a video last weekend. It's kind of refreshing. It's nice having a weekend off where I can concentrate on some stuff. I got the rest of the rust repair done on the 69. I'm starting to clean up the underneath. I'm going to get it all in primer this afternoon. I'm just going to keep plugging away at it, and I'll film a little bit here and there so you guys can see what I'm doing. I've ordered the paint for the inside of the car. We're going to finish up the body work. I'm plugging away. It's good. Today, we're going to talk about stuff we see on the internet and how all the misinformation that gets put out there leads to the confusion when it comes to Ford stuff, when it's really pretty straightforward if you just pay attention to what you're doing and use a little common sense. My grandpa always said common sense wasn't common. I always thought he was weird, but he was 100% right. So we're going to do a little show and tell over on the bench. Speaking of show and tell, you guys want to hear a story from Jason's past? Well, you're going to hear it anyway. So kindergarten. You know, kindergarten always had show and tell and stuff back in the day. I don't know if they still do or not. I don't remember any of my kids doing it, but I did. And every week I take my Hot Wheels in because they were my favoriteest thing ever. And I got in trouble with my parents. You can't take your Hot Wheels in every week and show them. Yeah, but this is my favorite thing. Well, you can't take them anymore. Okay. So I snuck 6 or 7 of them in my coat pocket. Off to school I go, and I'm showing my Hot Wheels for show and tell. Big sister rats me out. I get in all kinds of trouble when I get home. Man, she was terrible. End of story. That was it. Let's go over to the bench. I'll show you guys what we got going on. But first, here's the photo that prompted this whole thing. And you look at the picture and you wonder, how in the world did that even happen? Well, here's how it happened. Okay, so the lighting's a little bit weird because I got sunlight coming in through the doors, and I couldn't figure out how to do this on my tripod and get a good shot. So, when you take the timing chain cover off of a Ford, these are the 3 things. Oops, forgot to put this one on there. Here's the 3 things you're going to see. One of these 3. Fuel injected. Doesn't use a mechanical fuel pump. Early mechanical fuel pump, later mechanical fuel pump. This is a 2-piece eccentric. Those 3 pieces aren't the only thing that's different. The upper sprocket is going to be different for each one of these. Can you guys see that? The way it's got a raised up boss that the oil slinger sits on. And the oil slinger's got a little tab in the back side that goes in that hole. Keeps it from rotating. This one also has a raised up boss. And the eccentric will sit on there, and this is what drives your mechanical fuel pump. This is the arm, and it'll ride on, well, let's put the face in the right direction. It'll ride on that arm, or on the arm will ride on the eccentric. And this is the later 2-piece. Also has a tab on the back side, but you'll notice the front is completely flat, and that's so it locks this ring down. Like that. So that when you put the bolt in the center, this can't spin. And you notice in the photo that this was the upper sprocket that he had on it with this style eccentric. You see what's going to happen? Locked down, that eccentric sit there and spin. And it's not supposed to. And if it does, what'll happen is exactly what was in the picture. Now I saw every comment under the sun telling this guy what was wrong. The fuel pump's wrong. The eccentric must be bad. But nobody said anything about him having the wrong eccentric for the upper sprocket that he had. One piece eccentric on a timing sprocket that has that raised boss. I have used the one-piece eccentric on the fuel injection style upper sprocket. That's why when you order a timing chain for a small block Ford, it's going to give it to you in year groups, so they can make sure they give you the right upper sprocket. And honestly, for fuel injection stuff, I don't think it would really matter which one you were using, just because it's an oil slinger, as long as there wasn't any interference between that and the timing chain cover, because that's one thing you will run into. And I've taken engines apart that had the whole back of the timing chain cover all chewed up because they had the wrong eccentric or oil slinger with the wrong upper sprocket. So it's, like I said, if you can use just about whatever timing chain you want with the oil slinger, as long as you have the room for it. And you can look right through the fuel pump. You can look right through the fuel pump hole and you can see how much space you have, or you can do the clay thing, or you can just use a straight edge and measure it and measure the inside of the timing chain cover and all that kind of stuff to make sure that you're not going to have any interference problems. I think that pretty much covers that. If you guys have any questions about that kind of stuff, let me know and I'll be more than happy to cover it some more in another video. One more very important thing I need to add. I should probably go grab an oil slinger so I can show you guys. Okay, so one thing I didn't do is there was another picture where it showed his eccentric that has this tab on the back was completely smashed flat. When you buy a camshaft for a small block Ford, it's going to come with two different length dowels. The longer dowel is for the old style one-piece eccentric, because that dowel actually goes through the hole and it locks this down. And then the bolt will go in. That dowel will only stick out of the timing upper sprocket just enough to go through this to lock it in and still allow the bolt to tighten down, because the big washer on the bolt also holds the dowel in place. So remember that. The oil slinger and the later two-piece style fuel pump eccentric is going to have this tab on the back side, so you're going to use the shorter dowel that sits back in the sprocket and leaves room for that tab to sit back into the sprocket, so that when you tighten up the bolt, it's locked in. Now here is the next one. This is small block Chevy. I'm going to dig through them and see if I got some small block Chevy rocker arms so we can look at them, and we'll compare it to the ones from Ford. But here's the photo first, and we'll see what you guys think. Okay, here's Mr. Shaky Hands and Weird Lighting again. Early style Ford, later style Ford, small block Chevy, aftermarket small block Chevy. And I've talked about this in other videos, and I'll get to that in just a second. On Fords, it was a cast rocker that had these little tabs on each side of the valve to help keep it centered. And they also kind of had a guide plate built into the cylinder head where the push rod hole is. It was fairly narrow. It was kind of elongated. And it would also help locate the push rod to kind of keep the stuff from moving around. But not all of the early Ford cylinder heads had that cast kind of a guide plate as part of the cylinder head. That was really the high post stuff. Also, that style rocker, the cast style rocker, ended in around 1970 somewhere, when all Fords went to the Cleveland style stamped rocker with the little sheet metal guide to keep stuff from moving around. The last thing you want is the tip of the rocker coming up, or the end of the rocker coming off the tip of the valve. And I showed you guys these in another video, and they use those sheet metal guides to keep the rocker from moving around, and the end of the fulcrum is squared off and it rides in that sheet metal. Hang on a second and I'll grab one. The sheet metal guide, rockers bolt down through this, locks into that and won't let the rocker rotate. Small block Chevy. Ball type fulcrum. Sorry, this stuff's really dirty. I probably should have cleaned this up first, eh? But let's use a stamped steel rocker. And they used the pushrod hole in the cylinder head to kind of keep this located, but it would still move around a lot more than any of the Ford stuff would. But it obviously worked fine because they didn't really have a whole lot of problems, valve terrain problems. Now in the stamping, you see how it's got raised up areas? That helps locate it. But if this gets loose, it can dance around wherever it wants. And we'll talk about the picture here in just a second. Roller tip rockers, these are comps, but roller tip rockers aren't the only aftermarket ones you can get for small block Chevy. You can just get the standard type stamped steel. This hole is going to be longer to allow for more lift. You can get it in 1:5 or 1:6 ratios. But this is the biggest thing that I've talked about it in other videos. See those grooves that are cut? That allows oil to get down between the fulcrum and the rocker. You see how the factory one is just smooth, it doesn't have those? You see that? Now, I don't know how close you guys looked at the photo, but the fulcrum pulled out of the bottom of the rocker. There's a couple different things that can cause that. It can be wheel starved, or just wore out the bottom of the rocker, or the spring pressure was too high for that style rocker. This is my opinion. And it's been dyno proven. If you're going to a lot of spring pressure, you want to go to an extruded aluminum roller rocker. And it's to help stabilize the valve train. Roller rockers don't really add any power. You might see a couple, but you're not going to feel 2 horsepower heading down the drag strip. It's to stabilize the valve train and to keep from running into problems like we saw in that picture where the rocker was broken. So oil starvation, spring pressure was too high, or the nut on the rocker backed off and let the thing loosen up and it just beat itself to death. Or common problem on Fords and Chevys where they just use pressed in rocker studs. That stud could have backed out a little bit and loosened up and just let the rocker beat itself to death. But there was every opinion under the sun thrown out there what it could have caused this, when honestly those are really the only 4 things. There's just too many people trying to overthink stuff. They're trying to reinvent the wheel. I just look at a problem, solve the problem, fix the problem. Keep it simple, stupid. Okay, here's another good one. I'm gonna go grab some stuff for show and tell. Hang on just one second. Before we move past that, even with the stamped steel rockers, you can still use these. I've heard them called polylocks. These are called Sure-Locks. These are some old Mr. Gasket stuff. Basically, this becomes your new rocker nut. It's got an Allen-headed set screw that goes down into the top and tightens down onto the stud and heave on it, and it'll lock this thing so it won't let the rocker loosen back up. So if you're in some racing class somewhere or whatever, you're allowed to use screw-in studs, but you have to use factory rockers. Most of those guys are still running something like this, and a lot of them are running something like this with a girdle to keep the studs from moving around. Not all classes allow that, but that's just a little trick to try to keep factory stuff alive. Okay, so those pictures didn't actually come from the internet. Those came from an engine I took apart. But I saw photos almost just like that on a post on Facebook from a guy that, I mean, it was almost identical to that. The push rods were worn from contacting the guide plates. And his question was, or post was, hey, my push rods are riding on my guide plates and it's wearing them out. Hold on a minute. And you should have seen some of the responses. This is the truth. Guide plates are made exactly for that. The push rod will ride on those because that's what's keeping the rocker centered on the valve tip. And a roller rocker, extruded aluminum or stainless or whatever, if it's not shaft mount, that's what keeps the rocker located, because it doesn't have the little bosses sticking off the ends of the rocker. It doesn't have any of that stuff to keep it centered. The only thing it has is the push rod guide plate. Until you get into like Jessel or something like that, shaft mount stuff, where that's what locks the rocker in and it keeps it very stable. Super expensive, but that's high-end race stuff. When you are using guide plates, it doesn't matter if you're using a stamped steel rocker, it doesn't matter if you're using an extruded aluminum roller rocker, you have to use hardened push rods. Period. End of story. If you don't, and you try putting the factory ones back in, that's exactly what will happen. The guide plate is harder than the push rod, and it's going to wear it. Fords actually used guide plates that were hardened push rods, dummy. Hardened push rods. What the hell's wrong with me? But only on half of it. So if you take one of these things apart and you got to put it back together, bean counter saving money, you know. You got to put it back together. You need to pay attention and make sure you put it back in there the same way that it came out. It doesn't need to be in the same exact hole. It can go wherever. But you need to make sure that it is facing the same direction that it was originally. Am I missing something? Am I forgetting something? I feel like I'm forgetting something. Hang on a second, I'll show you a guide plate. We'll talk about it for a second. Now I have some of these for Fords and I have some for Cleveland's with the canted valves and all that stuff over on the shelf. But this is the one that was handiest to get. And the one for a small block Ford is going to look pretty much just like this. So these are the guide plates that we had back in the day. Basically, it would sit in the cylinder head and the rocker studs would go down through them and it would lock this thing down. You know, you had some adjustability where you could move this thing around and try to line up the push rod so that your rockers were sitting straight, so that it was sitting on the valve tip the way it was supposed to be. But these weren't perfect. So what we used to do is we would split these things in half, cut it, we would move them where they needed to be so that the push rod was in line, the rocker was in line, and it was centered on the valve tip, and we would weld it back together. Now, the first time I saw a really smart one was AFR. Basically, it's cut like that. It's one side's got a tab that sticks off of it, and the other side has a groove. Cut just like that, so that you can move these things around and lock them down, and they couldn't twist at all because of that tongue. Really smart. And if you wanted to go the extra mile, you could get them locked down and you could weld it to make sure that it isn't going to go anywhere. But I've put quite a few of those cylinder heads on and I haven't welded them, and everything's been just great. Now the problem with these, and even with the other ones, and with aftermarket cylinder heads, well, the Chinese casting cylinder heads, I saw another post. Well, a guy showed a picture of a guide plate just like this. The problem is it said Pro Comp right on the top of it, right in the picture, with the push rod going down through it, and it was rubbing against the hole in the cylinder head. The push rod was rubbing against the hole. It's like this wasn't in the right spot, or that hole wasn't in the right place. And he says, well, it's rubbing against my cylinder head and it's wearing my push rod. Whoa! Number one, it shouldn't be, aluminum should not be wearing your push rod. And that tells me right there that you needed hardened push rods that you don't have, and you're running guide plates, so you're going to have something that comes out looking like that. And that's just something that you're going to get with Chinese castings because they're not going to be 100% perfect. And he was asking how to fix it. Well, the first thing I would do is I would look to see if the rocker was sitting the way it was supposed to be. Is the roller sitting on the center of the valve tip through the whole sweep? When I wiggle it from side to side, because you're going to have a little bit of side to side movement, when I wiggle it to side, does it stay pretty much centered on the valve tip? And if it does, okay, well, there's definitely a problem with the cylinder head, and you just grind the hole to make clearance for the push rod. If it's not setting centered, then this needs to be cut. It needs to be moved so that you can center up the rocker on the valve tip, and then you're going to check to see if it's still rubbing or contacting the cylinder head. Common sense. But there was every answer in the book out there about, you know, what was wrong. I don't understand what these harebrained ideas and crazy thoughts that these people have on how to fix something simple like that. I honestly don't get it. You don't need to overthink it. You just need to pay attention to what you're doing. And that's something that you need to watch for when you're assembling your engine, to make sure all that stuff is good. Because this is one that had been run and he was taking it back apart, freshening it up or putting gaskets in it or something. That's just something that he noticed. Well, it never should have gotten that far. It should have been fixed before the engine was ever fired, during mock-up, really. Because you go cutting and grinding and welding and everything else, then everything's got to come apart and it's got to be cleaned before you assemble the engine. That's why professional engine builders charge what they charge, because there's a lot more that goes into it than just throwing an engine together in your garage. Because they pay attention to stuff like that and they fix the problems, and the engine may go together 2 or 3 times before final assembly. It's just something to think about. Okay, so I don't normally ever reply or respond or anything to whatever stuff I see on Facebook, because honestly I have no interest in getting involved, and I'm not getting into an internet argument with somebody. I'm just not. But this one time I did respond because I just couldn't not. But the guy asked, he said, I've got a whatever year 302, I'm going to take it to the machine shop. How far can I bore this thing out? And of course he got every answer under the sun. Well, you know, you can go to 40 thousandths, or you can go to 30 thousandths, or you can go to 60 thousandths on early blocks, or you can do this, or you can do that. So I put my 2 cents worth in. It would depend on how far or how worn the bore is and where the machinist thinks it'll clean up. If it'll clean up at 30 thousandths, then 30 thousandths. If it'll clean up at 40 thousandths, great. If you sonic it and it's fine and it'll clean up at 60 thousandths, then that's it. But you don't just take a good standard bore block in the machine shop and tell them, I want this thing opened up as far as it'll go. Well, you just shot yourself in the foot. Because if you take one of these standard bore blocks and it'll clean up at 30 thousandths, and you take it out and you run it for 150, 200,000 miles, and I'm ready for another rebuild, or if it'll clean up at 10 thousandths, then do that, because you got 2 or 3 more rebuilds in there. You wear it out at 30 thousandths, you get it checked, hey, this thing will clean up at 40 thousandths. Okay, well, you just got yourself a second rebuild. You wear it out at 40 thousandths. Okay, well, this block soniced fine and there's got plenty of meat in the cylinder walls, it'll clean up at 60 thousandths. Well, you just gained yourself 3 rebuilds. You just put over 500,000 miles on this 302 block. Or whatever, even maybe 600,000 miles, whatever. That block will last a long time if you let it talk to you and tell you what it actually needs. And that's all you really need to do. Because that 60 thousandths, that extra 30 thousandths overbore from 30 to 60 isn't going to make you any more power. What are you going to gain? 4 horsepower? So there's not really any point. So I guess this was kind of an engine detective video, talking about all kinds of different stuff. I feel pretty good about it. Let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like and subscribe and all that nonsense. And I think I'll probably wind up making another video next weekend, maybe. But I think the next video is going to be, I've seen all kinds of stuff about you know, 351 versus 302, the inherent problems with both of them, and why you should go aftermarket block, and why you should definitely LS swap it, which you'll never see on this channel. It's not going to happen. So we're going to just I'm gonna give you the concrete differences, deck height, main bearing diameters, all that kind of stuff. The parts that are interchangeable between the two, we're gonna talk about that in the next video. And we are gonna be doing the piston flip thing. I don't know how good the piston flip video is honestly gonna be because I've pretty much covered all the stuff. We are gonna put the degree wheel on the engine. We're gonna run the piston through the sweep, reversed and the regular way, and we're gonna see if it changes anything in the middle of the stroke. And I think I still have a video that I can post when I do that, kind of giving my thoughts. I think that's it. So I'm gonna get working on this 69, try to get something done. You guys get out in the shop and work on your projects. You have a great day, and I will see you in the next video.